Dr. Hee-jin Choi stood at the observation window of Research Station Phoenix, watching the stars with tired eyes. For 50 years, humanity had traveled between those stars, building colonies, sending messages into the void and hoping for an answer. They knew aliens existed. Strange ships had been spotted near human space, always watching, never responding. The galaxy was full of life, but that life wanted nothing to do with Earth. Hee-jin understood why some humans felt angry about it. Humanity had worked so hard to reach the stars, only to find themselves alone in a crowded universe. But she remained hopeful. One day she believed the aliens would see that humans were worth talking to. One day they would be welcomed as equals. That hope seemed foolish now as alarms screamed through the station. A damaged alien vessel tumbled through space, leaking atmosphere and trailing debris. 3 life signs remained aboard. They were dying. Captain Minho Kang didn't wait for orders. His fighter squadron launched from the station within minutes, racing toward the crippled ship. Minho was young, cocky, and absolutely certain he could save anyone. His wingmen followed him through the debris field, dodging chunks of twisted metal that spun like deadly toys. They attached cables to the alien vessel and dragged it back to the station. Medical teams waited in the docking bay, ready with equipment that had been prepared for this moment even though most people thought it would never come. The airlock opened and humans saw living aliens for the first time. The Krillians were tall, scaled, and clearly built for war. Even injured and unconscious, they looked dangerous. Hee-jin supervised their treatment personally, working through the night to keep them alive. She spoke to them in their own language, learned from decades of intercepted transmissions. When the first Krillian officer opened his eyes and saw a human face, Hee-jin smiled. The rescue changed everything. News of human bravery spread across the galaxy faster than any human ship could travel. The Galactic Council, which had ignored humanity for decades, suddenly couldn't pretend Earth didn't exist. 3 weeks later, an official message arrived. Humanity was invited to Nexus Prime for formal talks. Ambassador Doyen Lee prepared for months. He was old, careful, and absolutely determined to make this work. He chose gifts that showed humanity's best qualities. Art from every human culture. Music that could make you weep. Books of philosophy and poetry. Lee wanted the aliens to see that humans were more than warriors and survivors. They were dreamers and creators, too. Nexus Prime was beautiful and terrifying. The station floated at the edge of neutral space, built by civilizations that had mastered technology while humans still lived in caves. Alien species walked the corridors, speaking languages that human computers could barely translate. Lee felt very small and very young in that ancient place. The meeting room was worse. High Counselor Vethera of the Krillian Dominion sat at the head of a massive table, his scales gleaming under cold lights. Beside him sat representatives from the Hive Collective and the Skyborn Federation. They looked at Ambassador Lee the way someone might look at a child playing at being important. Vethera spoke slowly, as if Lee might not understand. Humanity would be granted probationary status on the Galactic Council. They could keep their existing colonies but could not expand further without permission. They could trade but only under strict supervision. They could defend themselves but could not build weapons beyond approved designs. The message was clear. Humans were tolerated, not welcomed. Lee swallowed his pride and accepted the terms. It was better than nothing. Back on Earth, celebrations filled the streets. Humanity had finally joined the galaxy. Most people didn't read the fine print of the agreement. They didn't understand that they had been placed in an invisible cage. Only one alien seemed concerned. Ambassador Lysara of the Skyborn Federation found Hee-jin in a quiet corridor 2 days after the official meeting. Lysara was bird-like, graceful, and clearly uncomfortable. She spoke in whispers, constantly checking to make sure no one else was listening. The Council was afraid of humans, Lysara explained. They had studied Earth's history and seen nothing but war. Thousands of years of humans fighting humans, developing deadlier weapons, building empires and watching them burn. The Council believed that if humanity was allowed to grow strong, they would become a threat to the entire galaxy. Some Council members wanted to eliminate the problem now, before it was too late. Hee-jin tried to explain that humanity had learned from its mistakes. Yes, their history was violent, but they had also created beauty and fought for justice. They had overcome their worst instincts. They wanted peace. Lysara looked sad and unconvinced. She warned Hyejin to be careful and disappeared into the crowd. Back home, Admiral Taemin Park read the intelligence reports with growing concern. Park was not a politician or a diplomat. He was a military man who had spent his career preparing for wars he hoped would never come. He looked at the treaty restrictions and saw something everyone else had missed. The Council wasn't just limiting human expansion. They were making sure humanity couldn't defend itself properly. Park began quietly upgrading Earth's defenses. He couldn't build banned weapons, but he could train better soldiers. He couldn't expand the fleet, but he could make sure every ship was ready for combat within hours. His staff thought he was paranoid. Park hoped they were right. 6 months passed. Humanity tried hard to be good galactic citizens. They followed every rule, respected every restriction, and hoped the Council would eventually trust them. Then the Council demanded that humans abandon Nova Terra, their largest and most successful colony world. The official reason was galactic security. The real reason was that Nova Terra was too close to Council space, and the Council wanted humans farther away. Ambassador Lee begged for more time. 3 million people lived on Nova Terra. They couldn't just pack up and leave. He asked for a year to organize the evacuation. The Council gave him 2 weeks. When Lee protested, Vethra stood and declared the meeting over. The decision was final. Admiral Park watched all this from Earth and made a decision. He ordered the fleet to quietly move toward Nova Terra. Not to fight, he told his officers. Just to help with the evacuation if needed, just to be ready. The Council noticed. They saw human warships moving without permission and decided humans needed to be taught a lesson. War Master Dran of the Krillian military volunteered to deliver that lesson. He was everything that Vethra was, but worse. Cruel, arrogant, and absolutely convinced that humans were insects to be crushed. Dran took a battle fleet to Nova Terra with secret orders. Show the humans what happens when primitives challenge their betters. Dr. Hyejin Choi was on Nova Terra when the Krillian fleet arrived. She was studying the planet's unique ecosystem, cataloging species that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. She heard the air raid sirens and thought it must be a drill. Then the sky lit up with weapons fire. Dran's forces didn't target military installations. They hit cities, schools, hospitals. The bombardment lasted 3 hours. 3 million people died. Hyejin survived only because her research station was far from major population centers. She watched from an evacuation ship as the world burned, unable to look away from the horror below. The Krillians broadcast their message to all of human space. This was mercy, they said. This was a warning. Submit to Council authority or every human world would share Nova Terra's fate. They expected humans to surrender. They expected terror and obedience. They had no idea what they had actually done. On Earth, Admiral Park stood in the command center and watched the death toll rise. His staff waited for orders, faces pale with shock. Park's voice was quiet and cold when he finally spoke. Activate the war plans. Call up the reserves. Every shipyard goes to military production immediately. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was very, very angry. Ambassador Lee tried one last time to reach the Council. His transmission was ignored. Vethra issued a statement saying that regrettable violence had been necessary to maintain order. The Council expected humanity to accept this explanation and move on. They still believed humans were weak. They still thought Earth would back down rather than fight. They were wrong. Within days, every human world mobilized for total war. Factories that made consumer goods started making weapons. Scientists who studied peaceful problems began developing military technology. Artists and teachers joined the military. Humanity transformed itself with terrifying speed, and the galaxy was about to learn what humans became when you took away everything they had to lose. Colonel Yuna Shin studied the holographic display of the Krillian supply depot with cold precision. The depot floated in deep space, far from any inhabited system, and it held enough supplies to keep 3 battle groups fighting for 6 months. Taking it out would hurt the enemy badly. Getting in would be nearly impossible. Nearly impossible was exactly what Shin specialized in. Her team had spent 2 weeks tracking Krillian supply ships, learning their schedules and security protocols. They had captured a cargo vessel and studied every detail of its construction. Now they were going to pretend to be that cargo vessel and fly right into the heart of enemy operations. The captured ship drifted toward the depot, broadcasting proper identification codes. Krillian traffic control cleared them for docking without a second thought. Why would they suspect anything? Humans were primitives who didn't have the technology or the courage for this kind of operation. That arrogance was about to cost them dearly. Shin's commandos poured out of the cargo hold the moment the airlock sealed. They moved through the depot like ghosts, planting nuclear charges in critical locations. The few Krillian guards they encountered died before they could raise an alarm. Within 30 minutes, the charges were set and the team was racing back to their ship. They were 10,000 kilometers away when the depot exploded. The blast was visible across 3 star systems. More importantly, the commandos had stolen the depot's entire communications database before they left. Human intelligence officers would spend weeks analyzing Krillian tactical protocols, ship movements, and command structures. The galaxy was learning that humans didn't just fight. They studied, adapted, and struck where it hurt most. Admiral Park used that stolen intelligence to plan his first major fleet engagement. The Krillians were sending a battle group through a navigation point called Redemption Point. They expected an easy transit. Park was going to give them hell instead. The trap was set with brutal efficiency. Stealth mines floated throughout the navigation point, invisible to Krillian sensors. Human warships waited in the shadows of nearby asteroids, weapons charged and ready. Captain Minho Kang's fighter squadron practiced their attack runs one last time, checking systems and nerves. Minho wasn't cocky anymore. The death of Nova Terra had burned away his casual confidence, leaving behind something harder and colder. He still joked with his squadron, still pushed his fighter to its limits, but now there was purpose behind every action. He wasn't showing off. He was hunting. The Krillian fleet arrived precisely on schedule. 40 warships transitioned into normal space in perfect formation, their shields down and weapons idle. They never saw the mines. The first explosions tore through their formation, destroying 6 ships instantly and crippling a dozen more. Before the survivors could react, Park's fleet emerged from hiding and opened fire. Minho led his fighters straight into the chaos. Krillian pilots were skilled and experienced, but they had never faced anything like human fighter tactics. Humans flew formations that should have been suicide runs. They fired missiles at point-blank range, sacrificing armor for striking power. They used their fighters like guided missiles, ramming damaged enemy ships to finish them off. The Krillians broke. For the first time in their 10,000-year history, a Krillian battle group retreated from combat. They left 16 destroyed ships and thousands of dead behind them. Human casualties were light by comparison. Park's trap had worked perfectly. High Counselor Vethra watched the battle reports with growing rage and confusion. How had primitives defeated superior technology and training? His military advisors had no good answers. They muttered about luck and surprise, but Vethra could see the truth in their frightened eyes. The humans were better than anyone had expected. Dr. Hyejin Choi had a different kind of battle to fight. The images from Nova Terra haunted her dreams, but she couldn't afford to break down. Humanity needed her voice. She began broadcasting to neutral alien worlds, showing them what the Council had done. The footage was brutal and undeniable. Cities burning, children dying, and through it all the Krillian fleet orbiting overhead like executioners proud of their work. Hyejin spoke calmly in her broadcasts, letting the images do most of the work. She didn't call for revenge or hatred. She simply asked questions. Is this what the galaxy's ancient protectors do? Is this the order the Council claims to maintain? Should any species live in fear of extinction simply because the powerful find them inconvenient? Ambassador Lysara helped distribute those broadcasts across networks the Council couldn't control. She risked everything to do it. Her own government had declared her a traitor, but Lysara didn't care. She had seen the truth. The Council wasn't protecting the galaxy. They were protecting their own power, and they would kill billions to keep it. Some neutral species began asking uncomfortable questions. If the Council could do this to humans, what would stop them from doing it to anyone who became too successful? The galaxy's power structure was starting to crack, and humans were driving the wedge deeper with every victory. Human engineers worked miracles with captured technology. They took apart Krillian shield generators and improved them. They analyzed Hive collective plasma weapons and built better versions. The key was speed. Alien species spent decades testing and perfecting new technology before deployment. Humans built prototypes in weeks and tested them in actual combat. Sometimes the new weapons failed catastrophically. Sometimes they worked beyond expectations. Either way, human engineers learned, adapted, and tried again. Within 6 months of the war starting, Human ships had shields that rivaled anything the Council could field. Within a year, human weapons outranged even the best Krillian designs. Fleet Commander Zentor of the Hive Collective watched this technological race with growing alarm. He was a military officer, not a politician, and he understood what the numbers meant. Humans were winning the learning curve. For every battle the Council won, humans learned 3 new lessons. For every tactic that worked against them once, they developed 2 counters. Zentor compiled his analysis and presented it to the War Council. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. If the war continued, humans would eventually win. Not because they were stronger or more advanced, but because they adapted faster than any species in galactic history. The only way to stop them was genocide, and even that might not work. Better to negotiate peace now, while the Council still had something to negotiate with. War Master Dran called Zentor a coward. The Krillian officer stood and delivered a passionate speech about honor and strength. The Council couldn't show weakness to primitives. They needed to commit more forces, strike harder, and crush human resistance completely. Anything less would be admitting that the ancient powers could be challenged. The vote was close, but Dran won. The Hive Collective and Skyborn Federation agreed to continue the war, but both began quietly pulling their frontline forces back. They would maintain token presence for political reasons, but the real fighting would fall to the Krillians. Vethera accepted this arrangement because he had no choice. His species had started this war. His species would have to finish it. Admiral Park saw all of this through his intelligence networks. The Council was fracturing. The alliance that had seemed so overwhelming 6 months ago was now held together by pride and fear. Park adjusted his strategy accordingly. He would hit the Krillians hard and often, but he would avoid engaging the Hive Collective or Skyborn forces, except in self-defense. Let them withdraw. Let them doubt. Let them wonder if they were on the wrong side. Colonel Shin's Special Operations Team struck Krillian targets across 3 sectors. They destroyed shipyards, sabotaged command centers, and assassinated military leaders who were known for atrocities against human civilians. The Krillians responded with ever tighter security, but that only slowed them down. You couldn't fight an enemy who could be anyone, anywhere, at any time. Captain Minho Kang became a legend during this time. His fighter squadron, the Shadow Ravens, seemed to appear wherever the fighting was thickest. They saved human convoys, destroyed Krillian raiding parties, and once even attacked a Council diplomatic convoy to send a message. The galaxy talked about Kang with a mixture of awe and terror. Humans worshipped him as a hero. Aliens feared him as something darker. Minho himself remained focused on the mission. Every destroyed enemy ship was justice for Nova Terra. Every saved human life was a small victory against the darkness. He pushed himself and his squadron harder than anyone thought possible, and somehow they survived where others would have died. Dr. Hyejin Choi continued her broadcasts, but they had changed in tone. She no longer just showed the atrocities. Now she also showed human mercy, footage of human medics treating wounded Krillian prisoners, human engineers rebuilding infrastructure on liberated worlds that housed multiple species, human diplomats offering peace terms that were generous despite everything that had happened. The message was clear. Humans could be terrifyingly effective warriors, but they hadn't lost their humanity. They still valued life. They still believed in justice rather than revenge. They were proving the Council wrong about human nature, one act of mercy at a time. Ambassador Doyen Lee watched all of this from Earth and felt conflicted. 2 years into the war, Dr. Hyejin Choi stood in the medical research facility on Earth's moon, staring at test results that filled her with dread. 3 human colonies had reported a mysterious illness spreading through their populations. Millions were sick. Thousands were dying. The symptoms matched nothing in human medical databases. It took her team 18 hours to confirm what Hyejin already suspected. This was no natural disease. The Krillians had deployed a bioweapon specifically designed to target human DNA. War Master Dran had crossed a line that even the most brutal species considered sacred. He had chosen genocide as his weapon. The galaxy watched in horror as news of the bioweapon spread. Even species that had supported the Council's war effort now spoke out against this atrocity. Fleet Commander Zentor publicly condemned the attack and called for Dran's immediate arrest. Ambassador Lysara delivered an emotional speech to the Galactic Assembly, her voice breaking as she described what the Krillians had done. Hyejin worked without sleep for 3 days. leading a team of the best medical minds humanity could assemble. They dissected the bioweapon structure, analyzed its attack vectors, and raced to develop a cure. Human medical technology, refined through centuries of fighting disease, proved equal to the challenge. Within 2 weeks, they had a vaccine. Within a month, the epidemic was contained. The death toll was terrible. 47,000 humans died before the vaccine could reach everyone. But it could have been millions. It should have been millions. The Krillians had built their bioweapon assuming human medicine was as slow and bureaucratic as their own. They had forgotten that humans adapted faster than anyone else in the galaxy. Admiral Park called his senior officers to a secure conference room. His face was carved from stone as he laid out his response plan. Operation Starfall would be the largest coordinated military action in human history. They would strike every Krillian shipyard, weapons factory, and naval base within 100 light-years simultaneously. They would cripple the Krillian war machine so thoroughly that it could never threaten anyone again. Some officers questioned the scope of the operation. Wasn't this too much? Park's response was cold and measured. The Krillians had tried to exterminate humanity. They had failed, but the intent was clear. Humanity would not wait for the next attempt. They would end this war now, and they would make sure the galaxy never forgot the price of genocide. The attack came at dawn across 36 worlds. Human fleets appeared in Krillian space like ghosts, their stealth systems perfected through 2 years of constant warfare. They carried relativistic kinetic weapons, simple chunks of metal accelerated to a fraction of light speed. No shields could stop them. No point defense could intercept them. They were physics weaponized. Captain Minho Kang led the strike on the Krillian naval base at Vortex Prime. His squadron found War Master Dron's flagship docked for refit, its shields down and crew scattered across the station. Minho's targeting computer locked on and he whispered words meant for the dead of Nova Terra. Then he fired. The flagship exploded in a fireball visible from the planet below. Dron was aboard, confirmed by intelligence. The architect of Nova Terra and the bioweapon attacks died without ever knowing what hit him. Minho felt no satisfaction, only emptiness. Revenge didn't bring the dead back, but it did prevent future deaths. Within 48 hours, the Krillian military had lost 60% of its production capacity. Thousands of Krillian military personnel died in the strikes, but Park had been careful. Civilian targets were avoided. Residential areas were spared. Humanity demonstrated that they could hit with devastating precision and chose not to become monsters in the process. The Galactic Council finally fractured completely. Fleet Commander Zentor announced that the Hive Collective was withdrawing from the war immediately. He declared that his species would not participate in a conflict that had devolved into attempted genocide. Ambassador Lysara led a successful coup within the Skyborn Federation, arresting hardline council members and declaring neutrality. High Counselor Vethra found himself isolated and desperate. His alliance had abandoned him. His military was crippled. His people were frightened. The Krillian home fleet retreated to defend their core worlds, surrendering vast territories to human control. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Krillian Dominion faced the possibility of defeat. Admiral Park stood before Earth's war cabinet and presented them with a choice. Colonel Shin's intelligence teams had located the Krillian homeworld's exact position and current defenses. The planet was nearly unprotected. One strike could end the war permanently. Humanity had the power to do to the Krillians what they had tried to do to humanity. The room erupted in argument. Some called for justice. Some called for revenge. Some called for an end to the bloodshed by any means necessary. Dr. Heejin Choi listened to all of it with growing horror. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the noise like a knife. If humanity destroyed the Krillian homeworld, they would prove the Council right. They would become the monsters everyone feared. They would sacrifice their souls for victory. Yes, the Krillians had committed atrocities. Yes, they deserved punishment. But genocide was never the answer. Never. Not even in revenge. Ambassador Doyen Lee supported Heejin's position. The old diplomat had been silent through most of the war, his dream of peaceful contact shattered beyond repair. But he found his voice now. If humanity became genocidal conquerors, then the galaxy's fears about them would have been justified. The Council would have been right to try and stop them. Humanity had to be better than their enemies, even when it hurt. Admiral Park made the final decision. Humanity would not strike the Krillian homeworld, but they would occupy every strategic position around it. They would turn the cradle of Krillian civilization into a prison. The Krillians would live, but they would live knowing that only human mercy saved them. They would spend generations understanding what they had nearly lost. The occupation began within days. Human fleets moved into position around Krillia, close enough to strike but holding their fire. The message was clear and terrible. Humanity could end the Krillian species with a single order. They chose not to. That choice was a heavier burden than any weapon could inflict. Warmaster Dron was dead, but his legacy of hatred remained. A faction of Krillian officers refused to accept defeat. They assembled a suicide fleet, every ship they could scrape together from reserves and auxiliary units. Their target was Earth itself. If the Krillians were to be caged and humiliated, they would at least strike one final blow. Human intelligence detected the suicide fleet 2 days before it would reach the Sol system. Admiral Park ordered defensive forces into position, but Captain Minho Kang and his squadron were closest. The Shadow Ravens would have to hold the line alone until reinforcements arrived. The battle at the edge of human space was brutal and desperate. Minho's fighters flew patterns that would have been impossible for any other pilots. They sacrificed armor for speed, survival for striking power. Every destroyed enemy ship was paid for in human blood. Minho's wingmen died one by one, buying time with their lives. When Admiral Park's reinforcements finally arrived, only 3 fighters remained from Minho's squadron. The Krillian suicide fleet was destroyed, but the cost was devastating. Colonel Shin watched the battle recordings and felt her heart break. Humanity's greatest hero had sacrificed everything to save Earth. Captain Minho Kang's fighter drifted in space, its engines dead and life support failing. He had 1 missile left and 1 target in range. The Krillian flagship, its shields down and crew evacuating. Minho could have ejected. He could have waited for rescue. Instead, he armed the missile and spoke into his recorder, for Nova Terra. For every human who died because the galaxy couldn't accept us. For everyone who comes after, remember that we fought not because we wanted to, but because they gave us no choice. Remember that we could have been friends. Then Minho Kang aimed his damaged fighter at the enemy flagship and accelerated. The impact destroyed both vessels instantly. Earth was saved. The war was effectively over. And humanity's greatest warrior was gone, his name destined to be remembered forever alongside the millions who had fallen. Dr. Hyejin Choi heard the news while treating wounded soldiers in a field hospital. She sat down and wept for the first time since Nova Terra. Minho had been young and full of life when she first met him during the alien rescue that started everything. Now he was one more name on the endless list of casualties, one more price paid for survival. High Counselor Vethra watched the footage of Earth's survival and the death of the suicide fleet. He realized then that the war was truly lost, not because humans had better weapons or more ships, because they were willing to sacrifice everything for each other and still show mercy to their enemies. That kind of civilization couldn't be defeated. It could only be survived. Within a week, Vethra contacted Ambassador Lee and requested peace negotiations. The terms were simple. The Krillian Dominion would pay reparations. War criminals would face justice. And most importantly, the Krillians would live with the knowledge that humanity had shown them mercy when they deserved none. Admiral Park accepted the surrender on behalf of humanity. 5 years after the last shots were fired, Ambassador Doyen Lee stood on the observation deck of Nexus Prime and watched ships from a dozen species dock peacefully. The station that had once been the site of humanity's humiliation was now hosting the signing of the Treaty of Galactic Peace. Lee was older, grayer, and infinitely wearier than the hopeful diplomat who had first come here seeking acceptance. The treaty was everything Lee had once dreamed of, and more. Humanity would have full sovereignty over their territories. War reparations from the Krillians would help rebuild damaged worlds. Most importantly, humanity would hold a permanent seat on a reformed galactic council. Never again would any species be excluded or threatened simply for existing. Fleet Commander Zentor signed first on behalf of the Hive Collective. His species had learned their lesson early and paid a lighter price for it. Ambassador Lysara signed next for the Skyborn Federation, tears streaming down her face. Her courage in stopping her government from continuing a doomed war had saved countless lives. High Counselor Vethra signed last. The once proud Krillian looked ancient and broken. His species had paid the heaviest price for their arrogance. Krillian territory was reduced to a third of what it had been. Their military was restricted to defensive forces, and they would spend the next century paying for their crimes. Vethra's hand trembled as he placed his mark on the treaty. Admiral Taman Park attended the ceremony in full-dress uniform. He did not smile. 40 million humans had died in a war that should never have happened. Victory brought no joy when measured against that cost. But Park had ensured that those deaths meant something. The galaxy would never again dismiss humanity as primitives to be controlled or eliminated. Dr. Hyejin Choi watched the signing from the diplomatic gallery and felt conflicted. Peace was what she had always wanted, but it had come through violence and suffering. The idealistic scientist who had once dreamed of friendly first contact was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes survival required terrible choices. After the ceremony, Hyejin announced her next project. The Restoration Initiative would work to rebuild worlds damaged by the war, regardless of which species lived there. Human engineers and resources would help repair Krillian infrastructure. Human doctors would treat wounded aliens. Humanity would prove that they could be as good at building peace as they had been at winning wars. The announcement shocked the galaxy. Many humans felt betrayed. Why should they help the species that had tried to exterminate them? Protests erupted on Earth and the colonies. Veterans groups accused Hyejin of dishonoring the dead. Death threats arrived daily. But Hyejin continued, supported by Admiral Park and Ambassador Lee. Someone had to break the cycle of hatred, Hyejin explained in her broadcasts. Someone had to prove that former enemies could become partners. If humanity wanted lasting peace, they needed to show that mercy and justice could coexist. Revenge felt good in the moment, but it poisoned the future. Slowly, attitudes began to change. Human volunteers joined the Restoration Initiative. They worked alongside Krillian Hive and Skyborn workers to rebuild damaged cities and infrastructure. Former enemies shared meals, traded stories, and discovered that they had more in common than anyone had imagined. Friendship grew in the ruins of war. A massive memorial was constructed in orbit of Nova Terra. The structure floated above the planet where 3 million humans had died, visible from the surface day and night. Every name was carved into the memorial's surface. Every face was preserved in holographic displays. Visitors walked through galleries that showed who these people had been before they became casualties. Captain Minho Kang's fighter cockpit was preserved as the memorial's centerpiece. Visitors could see where he had spent his final moments, read his last words, and understand what he had sacrificed. Human children learned about his bravery. Alien children learned about the cost of starting wars they couldn't finish. Fleet Commander Zentor attended the memorial's dedication ceremony. He was the first high-ranking alien officer to publicly honor human sacrifice. His speech acknowledged the Hive Collective's role in the war and apologized to the families of those who had died. Many in the audience wept, including Zentor himself. Apologies couldn't bring the dead back, but they could help the living move forward. Young aliens now studied at human universities, and young humans studied at alien academies. The first joint military exercises occurred, with former enemies training together. Admiral Park oversaw these operations personally, watching carefully as human and alien soldiers learned to trust each other. It wasn't easy. Old hatreds died slowly, but it was necessary. Colonel Yuna Shin retired from special operations at age 40. The woman who had been frighteningly good at war now taught at the new Galactic Military Academy. She trained both human and alien officers in tactics, strategy, and most importantly, ethics. Her students learned how to fight, but they also learned when not to fight. Sometimes, Shin told them, the hardest victories came without firing a shot. Ambassador Lissara and Dr. Hyejin Choi became close friends and partners. Together they established the Institute for Interspecies Understanding, dedicated to preventing future conflicts through education and cultural exchange. The Institute taught alien students about human history and human students about alien cultures. Understanding, they believed, was the foundation of lasting peace. The reformed Galactic Council established new protocols based on lessons learned from the war. No species could be quarantined or excluded from galactic society. Disputes had to go through arbitration before military action was permitted. The use of weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations was declared the highest crime, punishable by collective intervention. Admiral Park addressed the new council on the 10th anniversary of the treaty. His speech was carried live across the galaxy. He spoke about the cost of war and the value of peace. He honored the dead and called on the living to ensure their sacrifice had meaning. But his final words were a warning that echoed across every world. Humanity did not want the war that nearly destroyed us, Park said. We begged for peace. We offered friendship. You forced us to become what you feared most. We hope the galaxy has learned this lesson. Never again will we stand silent when the powerful crush the weak. Never again will we allow injustice to go unchallenged. We are here now. We are part of this galaxy, and we will protect it whether you want us to or not. The council chamber fell silent after Park's speech. Some delegates looked uncomfortable. Others looked ashamed. But all of them understood. Humanity had proven themselves in war. Now they were proving themselves in peace. The galaxy had gained not just another member, but a guardian who would never forget what it felt like to be dismissed and threatened. High Counselor Vethra approached Admiral Park after the session ended. The old Krillian looked frail and tired. He thanked Park for showing mercy when his species deserved none. Park's response was quiet but firm. Mercy wasn't for you, he said. It was for us. We could have become monsters to defeat you. We chose to remain human. That choice saved our souls, even if it couldn't save all our people. Ambassador Doyon Lee retired at age 76, his dream of galactic cooperation finally realized. His farewell speech was brief and emotional. He spoke about the long road from humiliation to respect, from isolation to acceptance. He honored those who had died and those who had worked for peace. Most importantly, he reminded everyone that peace was not a destination but a constant effort. Dr. Heejin Choi took over as director of the Galactic Health Organization, coordinating medical research and emergency response across hundreds of worlds. She worked with scientists from every species, sharing knowledge that had once been hoarded. Diseases that had plagued species for millennia were cured through collaborative research. The woman who had survived Nova Terra was now saving lives by the billions. The next generation grew up in a galaxy transformed by humanity's emergence. They learned about the war in history classes but experienced peace in their daily lives. Human children played with alien children. Mixed species crews explored new frontiers together. The barriers that had once seemed impossible to cross were falling, one friendship at a time. Admiral Park retired to Earth at age 77, finally laying down the burden of command. He spent his remaining years writing his memoirs, ensuring future generations understood what had happened and why. His book became required reading across the galaxy. The warrior who had defeated the Council's armies used his final years to teach peace. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had proven themselves as warriors when they had to, but they had also shown themselves to be builders, healers, and teachers. They were not the monsters the Council had feared. They were something far more dangerous to tyrants and bullies. They were people who would stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. And they would never, ever back down. 20 years after the treaty signing, the galaxy had settled into an era of unprecedented cooperation. Young people who had grown up during peacetime could barely imagine the horrors their parents had lived through. Humans and aliens worked side by side on hundreds of worlds, building a future their ancestors would never have believed possible. Admiral Taman Park was 77 years old and officially retired, spending his days writing memoirs in a quiet house on Earth. Dr. Heejin Choi, now 58, led the Galactic Health Organization and traveled constantly between worlds. Ambassador Doyon Lee had passed away 2 years earlier, mourned across the galaxy as a bridge builder and peacemaker. The war was history now, studied in classrooms but not lived in the streets. Then the Void Reavers arrived from the far edge of the galaxy, and everything changed again. The Reavers were a warrior species who had built their empire through conquest and intimidation. They had never heard of humanity or the First Contact War. They knew nothing about what happened when you provoked the sleeping giant. The Reavers attacked several frontier settlements, including mixed colonies where humans and aliens lived together. They captured prisoners, destroyed infrastructure, and broadcasted their superiority across all channels. When the Galactic Council sent warnings to cease hostilities, the Reaver commander laughed and sent back a message that would seal his species' fate. Your reputation is built on defeating old powers that had grown soft, the Reaver commander declared. Your human warriors defeated primitives who forgot how to fight. Test yourselves against real strength, against warriors who live for battle, and you will break like glass. We are the Void Reavers, and we fear nothing. The broadcast included footage of human colonists being executed as an example. The Reaver commander wanted to provoke humanity into a fight. He had no idea he had just made the worst mistake in his species' history. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what humanity would do. Admiral Park received the call late at night. The Earth government asked if he would come out of retirement one final time. Park agreed without hesitation. He was old and tired, but some battles couldn't be avoided. The Reavers had attacked innocent people and challenged humanity directly. They would learn the same lesson the Krillians had learned 2 decades earlier. But this time Park wouldn't be leading human forces alone. Fleet Commander Zentor, now elderly himself, mobilized Hive Collective ships in support. Ambassador Lysara convinced the Skyborn Federation to join the coalition. Even the Krillian Dominion, led by a new generation that had grown up learning about their parents' mistakes, offered military support. The message was clear. Attack humans and you faced not just humanity but everyone who stood with them. The galaxy had learned that peace was worth defending, and humanity had taught them how to defend it properly. Dr. Heejin Choi delivered the official warning to the Void Reavers, broadcast across every frequency where they might receive it. 20 years ago, the galaxy made a terrible mistake, Heejin said calmly. They provoked humanity and learned what we become when we have no choice but to fight. We warned them. They ignored us. You have made the same mistake. This is your only warning. Stand down immediately. Release your prisoners. Leave our space, or learn why even the ancient powers fear us. The Void Reavers laughed at the warning. They had never been defeated in battle. Their ships were powerful and their warriors fearless. They prepared for what they expected would be a glorious victory against soft civilized species. They had no idea what was coming. The combined fleet assembled under Admiral Park's command was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Human ships with technology perfected over 2 decades of innovation. Hive Collective carriers with fighters designed using human tactical doctrine. Skyborne battleships with weapons that combined alien power with human precision. Even Krillian vessels, their crews eager to prove they had learned from their ancestors' mistakes. General Yuna Shin, formerly Colonel Shin, led the Special Operations component from her command ship. She was 55 now, with gray in her hair and lines on her face, but her tactical mind was sharper than ever. She had spent 20 years training the next generation in the arts of war and peace. Now she would show the Reavers what a galaxy united could accomplish. The campaign was called Operation Nightfall, and it was executed with brutal efficiency. Human Special Forces teams, now trained alongside alien partners, infiltrated Reaver space using techniques perfected during the First Contact War. They sabotaged supply lines, destroyed command posts, and rescued prisoners before the main fleet even arrived. When the Reaver fleet met the combined forces in battle, they discovered what the Krillians had learned the hard way. Human tactics combined with alien capabilities created something terrifying. Battles that should have lasted days were over in hours. Defensive positions that should have held for weeks fell in days. The Reavers had never faced an enemy that adapted this quickly. The war lasted 6 months. By the end, Reaver space was occupied, their leadership captured, and their military completely dismantled. The galaxy had shown that the lessons of the First Contact War were not forgotten. United under human leadership and driven by shared values, the civilized species could defeat any aggressor. But what happened next surprised the Reavers more than their defeat. Dr. Heejin Choi arrived with reconstruction teams and medical supplies. Instead of harsh occupation and punitive measures, the galaxy offered the Reavers the same thing humanity had been denied 20 years earlier: a chance to join galactic society as equals. Reaver prisoners were treated with respect. Their wounded were healed in human hospitals. Their worlds received aid to rebuild damaged infrastructure. Human diplomats explained the new galactic order and invited the Reavers to be part of it. The only requirement was accepting that might did not make right, and that all species deserved basic dignity and protection. The Reavers had expected extermination or enslavement. They received mercy and opportunity instead. It broke something in their warrior culture and rebuilt it into something better. Within a generation, former Reaver worlds became productive members of the Galactic Council. Their warrior traditions channeled into peacekeeping and exploration, rather than conquest. Admiral Taman Park died peacefully 3 days after the treaty with the Reavers was signed. He was 78 years old. His funeral was attended by representatives from every galactic species, including former enemies who had become friends. Fleet Commander Centaur delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about the human who had taught the galaxy that true strength lay not in domination, but in the wisdom to show mercy. Park's legacy lived on in the galaxy he had helped shape. Human values of stubborn resistance to injustice, rapid adaptation to challenges, and ultimate compassion toward defeated enemies had transformed galactic civilization. The ancient powers learned that age did not equal wisdom, and the young species learned that strength came with responsibility. Dr. Heejin Choi continued her work, training the next generation of doctors and diplomats from every species. She established medical schools on Reaver worlds, teaching their healers techniques that combined traditional Reaver knowledge with advanced galactic medicine. The woman who had survived Nova Terra had dedicated her life to ensuring no one else suffered as she had. General Yuna Shin published her autobiography, which became required reading in military academies across the galaxy. The book was titled Choosing When to Fight, and it taught officers that the best warriors were those who understood when violence was necessary and when it was not. Shin's students went on to lead military forces across the galaxy, carrying her lessons with them. 25 years after the First Contact War, classrooms across the galaxy held young people from dozens of species learning together. In one such classroom on Nexus Prime, a young human cadet sat beside a young Reaver cadet, both studying the history of the war that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. Their instructor was an elderly Krillian veteran who had fought in those battles. The human cadet asked a question that had bothered her for weeks. Why did the Krillians attack humanity in the first place? Why start a war over nothing? The Krillian instructor was quiet for a long moment, his old scales catching the light as he considered his answer. We forgot that strength without wisdom leads to ruin, the Krillian said finally. We were ancient and powerful, and we thought that meant we were always right. We saw humanity's violent history and assumed they were dangerous primitives who needed to be controlled. We never considered that they were like us once, learning and growing and trying to become better. The instructor looked at each student in turn, his gaze settling on the young Reaver. And when humans proved stronger than we expected, we tried to destroy them rather than admit we were wrong. Your people made the same mistake. The Council made that mistake. The greatest lesson of the war is simple. Never judge another species by their past. Judge them by who they choose to become. The classroom fell silent as the students absorbed this lesson. The human cadet looked at her Reaver classmate and saw not an enemy but a friend. The Reaver looked back and nodded in understanding. They were the future, the generation that would never know the hatred their ancestors had carried.